Thank you for your interest in BravePoint's Pro2SQL product. My name is Terry Mays, and I manage the DBA and Replication Services group here at BravePoint. In this demonstration, we'll look at how Pro2SQL replicates from a Progress database into a separate Microsoft SQL Server 2005 database. You'll also see the new administration tool built for Pro2SQL version 3. This tool is the primary interface for setting up the replication process. Pro2SQL is useful for Microsoft shops running a Progress application. Using the Graphical Administration and Monitoring tool, you can easily pick the tables and columns you would like to replicate to the SQL Server database. The tool will generate the SQL statements necessary to create the tables and initialize the data in those tables in the SQL Server database. What used to take hours now happens in essentially real time with BravePoint's Pro2SQL. The slide you are now seeing is a brief overview of the database layouts we will review today. Moving left to right, the Standard Progress DBs section indicates the Progress databases we want to replicate. There is essentially no limit to the number of databases you may replicate within a single copy of Pro2SQL. One copy can help to streamline all the data within your business. The replication layer portion of the slide indicates the Progress database that holds the 6 new tables needed for Pro2SQL replication control. Be aware that in this demo, we move these tables into a separate replication database. This is not a requirement for installation. You may just as easily have these 6 tables embedded into one of your production databases. These types of decisions are typically made during implementation. Again, moving left to right, you'll see 2 Progress Data Server databases. For those of you unfamiliar with a Progress Data Server, these databases are nothing more than placeholders for mapping the SQL Server schema to 4GL clients. These placeholders also hold the corresponding connection info for the target database. The data server uses native connectivity to connect to Microsoft SQL Server. One last point associated with this slide is that all of the particular pieces you see outlined are all running on a single box, or in our demonstration's case, a virtual machine or VM. This is also not a requirement for implementation. Pro2SQL supports standard Progress network connectivity. This means you have a ton of flexibility with implementation at your particular site. Now we'll switch over to a virtual machine and show all of this in action. The screen you currently see is the Pro2SQL version 3 administration screen. Let's first go through the menu options and then dive deeper into each of the tabs. The first menu option is labeled File. When we expand that menu, the first thing you see are options for loading and saving Pro2SQL configuration files. This basically allows you to back up and save your entire configuration of this admin tool. You'll also see options to independently load and save just the DB mapping portion of the tool. The second menu option is labeled Tools. The first submenu we see is Generate Code. This section of the menu allows you to generate a set of replication triggers that match how your definitions are outlined in the database map. We will discuss that more in detail shortly. You also have an option to generate the replication processor library. Again, this is based on your definitions as described in the database mapping. The processor library code is a set of Progress procedures, one per table to be replicated, and these procedures basically contain how the assignment from the source database to the target database is handled. These assignment procedures are standard Progress code and can even be edited outside of the Pro2SQL administration tool. Continuing down the menu, you see an option to generate a SQL schema. For any of your connected Progress databases, this option allows you to generate a set of SQL statements needed for building a duplicate database on the SQL Server side. This option is typically one of the initial steps of an implementation. If we pull up a previously generated file, you'll notice that it contains all of the table, field, and index statements necessary to build a SQL Server database. We can now take this script, open the SQL Server administration tool, paste it in as a new query, and use it to build our target database for replication. Continuing down the menu, you'll see Update Source Schema, which we'll cover later, and Bulk Copy. The Bulk Copy option is used to initially export the data from your Progress database into your new SQL Server database. Again, this is typically used during implementation. Now let's discuss the tabs you see within the tool. The first tab is labeled Monitor and gives us an indication of what's going on within the replication process. The first item we see is the sleep interval. This option, listed in seconds, is the amount of time the replication processor sleeps between scans of looking for records to be replicated. We also see an indicator that the replication process is actually running. That piece of information will come in handy when we start changing the records. Notice that auto refresh is enabled. This option allows this grid of things to be replicated to auto refresh based on a 2-second interval. Notice you have several filter options that allow you to tweak the view of this grid. You can set an option for the detail of activity you wish to see in the replication log. The options range from none to verbose. We'll leave our logging detail at minimum for this demonstration. Queue disposition tells the replication processor whether or not it should clean up replication records as they are being applied. Let's assume you wanted some custom reporting to indicate the amount of replication activity on a particular table. Set queue disposition status to mark record applied, and then you can write reports against this table to obtain that particular data. I'll leave my setup as delete record or clean up as we go. Our next tab is labeled Properties. This is the area where you can edit various aspects of the tool. For example, the highlighted option allows us to determine output location of the export log. Our next tab is DB Map. This screen allows us to see at a database level the actual databases scheduled for replication. In this example, 2 Progress databases are set up for replication. The last tab, labeled Mapping, allows you to set up the real magic of Pro2SQL. Notice that I'm currently viewing the entire table field mapping for the MFG Pro database. The top area shows that I have several tables that are not being replicated. Notice the Auto Map button. This allows me to select one or more tables from the source DB, and the tool will auto map the replication based on like field names in the SQL Server database. This greatly reduces the amount of time needed to set up the initial replication strategy. Again, as we click through the tables, you'll see the Field of Tables grid refresh to indicate the field assignments for any particular table. Note that while this example shows like field names, this is not a requirement for implementation. The map for field ABD_book could just as easily be replicated to target field book number if that field in fact existed on the SQL Server side. Okay, let's see this product work. First, let's switch back to the Monitor tab. As we mentioned before, this area of the grid indicates things that need to be replicated. At present, we show no items that need to be replicated. We'll push this over just a bit so we can keep an eye out for things going on.